Welcome to Just Men, a life-changing program that resonates hope as well as encouragement. The program that gives you information and inspiration for the glory of God. I'm your host, Jeff Tate, and thank you for joining Just Men. On today's program, we have a very special guest. It's his first time being on Just Men. Please welcome Dr. John Michael Grogan. Brother Grogan, welcome to Just Men.
Thank you. Thank you.
Man, I tell you, it is a wonderful pleasure and a gift for you to be on our program. We're honored, we're grateful. And let me say on the onset, you add value to Just Men, and we're just excited about what God is going to share through you and from you and how you're going to inspire our listening audience.
Yes, thank you. Great pleasure to be here.
Wow. Well, so let's, I want to dive right into this and just share just a quick bio on who is John Michael Grogan.
Well, I was involved in the real estate business with my father and my twin brother, and myself. And he said, because you're the sons of the owner, you only have to work half days. And he didn't care which 12 hours that was. Could be in the first 12 hours or the last 12 hours. But I got a lot of experience there, Jeff, working with people. And what I found out was one of the biggest lessons I learned as far as managing people was to hire attitude and train skill rather than hire skill and try to change attitude. The former is a lot easier to do because it's sometimes people get set in their ways and it's hard for them to change. So I would rather have hired, I had a real estate office for my father and took an aptitude test early on, showed that my best chances for advancement lie with a firm closely supervised by my father. So I went into the real estate business and I had an office. I took an office from 6 salespeople to 22 salespeople. This was in the 70s. And most of them were $1 million producers. Now you can sell one house and you're a $1 million producer, but not in those days. But I would rather take, we might use the analogy of a raw piece of clay and mold it to my way, to our company's way. Because a lot of times they would come in from another company and they wouldn't be doing well, and they would say things like, well, we didn't do that at XYZ real estate company. Well, quite frankly, I didn't care how they did it at XYZ, and that's the way we're going to do it here is this way. But I did try to play to their talents. And so then I was invited to do a program. I had a presentation that I used, and in conventions, real estate conventions, on how to hire, train, and retain good people. And so I started doing that around the country. And one thing led to another. It was successful, a lot of fun. Later on, I did the same thing, only for corporate America. Was on the platform with such notables as Paul Harvey and Dr. Joyce Brothers, Norman Vincent Peale, and Art Linkletter, and a number, and just traveling around the country with these people, and it was a grand experience. And then I went to work doing seminars, all-day seminars for Dun & Bradstreet. And so then I got out on my own, went out on my own, and this is kind of an interesting point, Jeff. This is why our antennas have to be up for the Lord's direction, because I was doing it for me. In other words, I got my confirmation from people. If they laughed, then I was approved of. If they even if they gave me a sitting ovation, I just felt like it was all about me, which is basically our society today. That's called the big I, as you well know. And so God, when he was ready to deal with me, and I was ready to deal with him at the age of 44. He dried that up. But he didn't leave me out in the wind, twirling in the wind to dry. He opened up an opportunity for me to write some books, and I wrote 6 books. 5 of them were published, 2 of them were bestsellers. Proverbs for Success, and Help I've Fallen and Need a Good Laugh. And so that's basically where I came from. I came to the Lord in 1980 to let Him do business with me, and it is the best move that I ever made. Yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful. I know behind the scene, you and I talked about life's lessons and the wisdom that you gain, and talk a little bit about that process of what you've learned, sort of before the light came on, and then after, once the light came on, how that changed for you in terms of wisdom, and where did you gain it?
Well, that's a good question. And when I was speaking for these people, it was a heady experience. And if you don't have your head really screwed on straight, it can mess with you, because you begin to believe your own press releases. That you're infallible. That my word is, you must do this in order to be successful, and no room for God. It's all about me. And so once I came to the Lord. And this is the thing that I think a lot of us have to remember, is that, and God could change us in a blink, but He chooses for some reason not to. There's a process. And I think one of the reasons, or one of the factors in that, Jeff, is that God has to take us into the cave where He can separate us from all of our friends and all of our associates, and it's just one-on-one. It's you and God. And He can work on you without getting a lot of distractions. And sometimes that's painful. I used the analogy the other night that if you took a cylindrical container, a captain's container, and filled it full of liquid, and it only held 1 quart, and you took a cylindrical container that holds 1 quart and filled that, and if you then poured the water from the cylindrical container into the captain's decanter, the water would obviously change shape. And if the water could talk, it would say, ooh, ow, oh, because it was being stretched. And that's basically what happens to us when we come to the Lord. He puts us we become a new person. He puts us in a new container. And sometimes that can be pretty painful. But like David said, I praise you even for my afflictions, because we know that the Father only means good for us. God only means good for us. It may be painful to go through, but in the end, as you and I were talking before the program, all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to His purpose.
Purpose. Talk a minute about purpose, and what has it meant for you, and how do you inspire purpose, especially when you're speaking and sharing with others?
Well, what I try to do, Jeff, is I try to say things in an unusual way. For example, I could say to a person, if you have doubts, you probably will fail to even try. Or I could quote Shakespeare and say, our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt. So that's unusual. They haven't heard something like that every day. And because I want them to ponder, I want them to think, I want them to review. And I lace my presentations with humor, but my purpose is not to be funny. Now, I may use I may use humor as a wedge or to transition from point to point, but I'm not there to be a comedian. I'm there to help them with insights. So what I see is, and I used to tell my salespeople this, I can lay out on the table for you how-tos, how to do this business called real estate. I can lay information out there until you fall asleep and fall out of your chair. But I want to make sure that you receive what I say, because I don't want to waste time. So I would call for a meeting with them, personal training, at 7 o'clock in the morning. We're going to talk about how to handle clients on the telephone. Now, if they didn't show up, that was a red flag. That was a major red flag, because I used to say, I will be as committed to you as you are to the business. And even today in the Christian walk, when someone comes to me and is bemoaning, has to reach up to touch bottom, I'll say one of two things. I'll either say, well, knowing God is better than having answers. Why don't we pray?
No.
Or I will say, well, I can help you change if you'll do three things. Answer three questions for me. Do you really want to change? Now, you don't have to answer this right now. You can take a week, you can take a month, because this is life-changing. But do you really want to change? Well, of course, they'll say, well, yes. And then I'll say, well, I'll ask them the second question. Do you want to change now? And they say, yes. They might not have any idea of the cost. And then the third question is, will you listen to me? Will you really listen to me? So we've got to have a purpose. And I think purpose precedes passion. I think you have to have a strong purpose, something that you can focus on. And it's like the Bible. You get into it, and then it gets into you. And the same thing is true with whatever we're doing, our marriage, our work, to go from getting by, as Huxley said, with the least amount of discredit, to really committed to what you're doing. So you have to have that purpose, and then you'll get the passion. And it just follows in that sequence. Yeah.
Wow. You talked about, too, the importance of not following the herd and how people influence you and how to break away from those influences. And talk a bit about that and share some wisdom about people as it relates to leadership.
Well, there are all kinds of people, and I said to you before the show, I would rather hire attitude and train skill than hire skill and train attitude. It's just a whole lot easier, But here's the thing. One of the things that God wants to teach us as men is the ability to stand alone. So in other words, if you see the herd heading in that direction, you can almost be positive that you should be heading in the opposite direction, because usually the herd is heading in the wrong direction. So we've got to learn to be a God pleaser and not a man pleaser. And one of the ways to do that, Jeff, is to ask yourself this question. When am I going to stop being concerned about what men think and do what I know is right? Don't be a man pleaser. Be a God pleaser. When God said, David is a man after my own heart, I think what David was a God chaser. And that's what you and I want to become. We want to become God chasers. He's our main focus. And yes, I love my wife and I love my children, but God is numero uno. God comes first, because he'll make everything all right. you know. I remember one time I had a commuter marriage with my wife. I lived in Ohio at the time, and I have a twin brother. He precedes me in the walk by about 7 years. He came in 1973, and I came in 1980. And I said, Thomas, I'd come down here and visit a long weekend, then I'd go home and I'd just be down in the dumps, you know. I was just, my love was 500 miles away in Nashville. I said, Thomas, when do you get off of this roller coaster? You know, I'm up and I'm down and I'm up and I'm down. And he gave me some of the wisest counsel that I ever heard. He said, John, God doesn't want you getting off the roller coaster. He just wants you to hang on. Because eventually he will level off the peaks, fill in the valleys, and straighten the road. But see, why a lot of people can't be helped by God is that they keep crawling off the altar of self-sacrifice and going away and doing their own thing. And I think of the analogy of like a real nice chicken coop. And we're all sitting in there on the shelves. And one day, God will open the door, turn on the light, and he'll go over and he'll pick someone off the shelf. He's got a mission for them. And but the problem is that we get antsy and we jump off the shelf, race out the door to what we think God could or should anoint. One day, he opens the door, snaps on the light, comes over to get us, but we're gone. We didn't wait long enough for God to come in, and so we could do his task with portfolio, with authority.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. I know you talk about the VIPs,
Oh, yes.
the VTPs, the VMPs,
Yes.
and of course the VDPs.
VNPs, yes.
Yeah, so talk about those processes, and I guess there's different characteristics for each and how they can play a role in your life.
Yes.
So let's start with
Well,
the
that's-
VIPs and then go
Yes.
to
That's
the
an
VTPs.
awfully good point to cover. First of all, we must remember, regardless of where they fall in the line, they do have a soul. So we shouldn't really cast anyone off. But some people will make you believe in retroactive birth control. I mean, it's just I don't know what it is about them. We had an Uncle Harry like that, and I think every family has an Uncle Harry. You just kind of, ooh, when Uncle Harry's coming over, because he's going to say something that's going to ruin everyone's day. But a VIP is a very important person. Now, they may not be well connected. They may not have a lot of money. They may not even be well schooled. But they've got connections. They've got street savvy. I think of our good friend Oscar Smith. He's just smart. He's got it. You know, how to move out there in the real world. And I don't know if he has a degree or not. I never asked him, but he serves the point whether he has a degree or not. But there are a lot of people like that don't have a degree. So they can help you. So they can become an ally. Now you have three kinds of people. You have an ally, you have an enemy, and you have a fence sitter. And the ally will be on your side and help you and want to see you advance. The enemy, at least they've identified themselves. You know, they don't like you, and that's fine. That's why they make vanilla chocolate. The person is fence sitter will be your ally if it serves them. Now, if it doesn't, then they'll fall into the other camp. It's all about me, you see. So the second category is very teachable or trainable person. And these are people that are, it's a pleasure to be with them because the windows of their mind are open. They'll listen. They'll take impartation. and they're a joy to work with. The third category is very nice people, VNPs, very nice people. And they're lovely to be with, they're a lot of fun, but they're really basically treading water through life. And you're not really going to learn a whole lot from them unless you're interested in baseball statistics from 1948, or what's going on the latest soap opera on television. But they don't really have real depth because they're not really committed or focused on anything. They're just kind of plodding through life. Left foot down, right foot, left foot, all rather boring. And then there are the VDPs, yes, VDPs. Very draining people. These are the people that will rob you. They either purposefully are cynical, or they are so glum about life that they will pull you down. And some people, Jeff, brighten up a room when they walk in it, and other people brighten up a room when they walk out of it. So we have to be judicious in who we're going to be allies with. We have to be careful of who we choose to hang with, because if you're hanging around with sinners, you're either going to say, "There's no life here for me," and leave, or you're going to become a sinner. One is going to influence the other one. So we have to be influencers, and there's no better way to do that than to walk with the Lord Jesus Christ.
I know that we want to talk about racial reconciliation. I know it's some of the things that God has placed in your heart, and you have a heart of bridging races together. But before we close and talk about racial reconciliation, share with me the wisdom of the light coming on. You talked a little about the light, the epiphany, and what you're trying to do in terms of creating an awakening for men and people in general to see life the way God sees it.
Yes. Well, sometimes when I'm doing a seminar or a meeting, and it's a room like this without windows, I'll employ a person from the audience that earlier before the meeting starts, and I'll say, "No, I want to give you a cue where you turn off the lights in the room." So I'll be talking in the seminar early on, and I will say to them, we're going to turn off the lights here. And once we get through the oohs and the ahs, and I want you to just take a moment, because I want you to listen for what's going to happen. So I'll signal my guy, he'll turn off the lights, pitch dark. And then I'll wait for a moment or two, and somebody has to call out, ooh, something like that. So then I'll signal the guy to turn the lights back on. I'll say, "I want to ask you something. Did you hear the lights come on? Were you focused on hearing the lights come back on? Let's do it again. Turn off those lights. All right, turn them on." He'll flip the switch. "Did you hear them?" "Well, lights go on, you don't hear anything." And that's the way learning happens. That's why we have to go through life with our antenna up. We always have to be prepared to listen to something, not just blindly go through life. Try to find those VIPs. And so you can say something, as I said earlier, in an unusual way that shakes up their thinker. The other thing is that if you don't see an immediate change where they go out of the room saying, "Wow, ooh, that's the best thing I ever heard," don't be concerned about that, because I will give a talk, and there'll be people nodding, and when I tell a story or a funny story, they'll laugh, and there'll be somebody over there, and they look like they were cast in stone. You know, they just, if they ever smiled, their face would crack and fall off. But invariably, they will come up to me during the break or at the end of the session and say, that was really a good seminar. I really got a lot out of that, because his mind was working. There was no exterior manifestation, but his mind was working. I'd rather have 10 people in my audience like that than people that are just having fun, or the company sent them there so they're suffering through. You know? I used to get a lot of that with Dun and Bradstreet seminars. Having said that, to say that the lesson, in other words, we're either breaking up hardpack by what we're saying. You know, if you went to a farmer's field, they would have a lane down the side of the field. They would be planting things in the field, but then they would have a drive for the vehicles, and that ground becomes hard. Called hardpack. Well, if we decide next year we're going to sow there, we've got to rip up that hardpack, till that soil. So we could be doing that, or we could be throwing in the seed, or we could be. But God causes the seed to grow.
God causes the seed to grow. Well, I know, I don't know where the time went. We got to have you back. But I want you to share in the last minute or so on the light that came on inside of you that said reconciliation. When it comes to race, when it comes to people of color, when it comes to, black and white and so forth. And what is that word, and how do you go about in doing that, and so forth. And just share what's on your heart as God awakened that light inside of you.
Well, we come to the Lord, I think, in one of three ways. We either have an interest, we're reading, we're talking to people, or we go to a meeting where there's a stirring orator or a preacher, and we get all bubbly inside, and we hit an emotional peak, but by next Tuesday we're down on terra firma again. Or we've had such pain in our life, and because of our own doing, most of the limitations we set on ourselves, most of the troubles we ourselves have created for ourselves. So I sometimes think that a person that has been pulled out of that mire, I think it was Seneca who said, I have tried to lift myself out of the pit, but I cannot do it. And I will not be able to do it unless a hand reaches down and lifts me up. He understood that it had to be God. There was a greater force than him. And he may not have been able to verbalize it that way, but that's what he meant. He had the wisdom to understand that. It wasn't him. He couldn't do it on his own.
Stay focused. Wow.